to the Top Performance Strength Podcast. This is Kip Steingart. I'm joined with fellow coaches Bill Miller and Declan Peterson. What's going on this morning, fellas?
Doing really well. Can't complain.
All right, guys. So for our first topic of conversation today, we're going to be discussing how we're going to be approaching strength conditioning during the fall ball season. So we just started fall ball with a 15-16U team this past week, Monday, going to day 3 today. So Bill, you want to talk about kind of what we've been covering with these guys over the last couple of days?
Yeah, so much of it has just been basic movement patterning and just make sure we're getting good at the basics. If you look at a lot of these kids, they spent the whole season or the whole summer in a baseball season, right? A lot of them didn't do any training. And so, grooving those patterns again to squat, hinge, press, and row. So simple, but a lot of these kids, they look like crap in day one. So we really had to clean some stuff up. And I think by next week, we should really start to push the weight a little bit more. But having that foundation, I think, is huge.
Yeah, always. It's just, it's tough when you're working with 20 kids in the fall ball season. You want to be able to get all of them in for, an individual assessment. And, our assessment process can take anywhere from 75 minutes to an hour and a half to ensure that, we're not only sitting down and we're discussing goals and injury history and training experience and things of that nature. Especially this time of year, right? We want to know if these guys have had some coaching in the past and who they've worked with, especially being in high school and getting a year under their belt for at least the sophomores and like the 1 or 2 juniors in the crowd. But some of them have been exposed to like a weight training class in high school, which we know for the most part is just absolutely atrocious, right? Along with the fact that I'm sure a lot of these baseball coaches, all with good intentions, have tried to put together some of their strength and conditioning programs. So kind of getting back into that assessment, right? We've been using this week as an opportunity to assess movement quality and take our framework of programming into the weight room and being able to observe guys and how well they move, determine what the proper variation of a squat is going to be, determine what the proper variation of a deadlift or a hinge pattern is going to be, and so on and so forth. So
yeah, and I know the topic of conversation with these kids is always, hey, how much you bench press? How much do you squat? Stuff like that. That's what these kids want to know. That's what these kids want to do. But if you have terrible squat form, terrible pressing patterns, there's no point in really loading it until they really have hammered down perfect technique. That's laying the foundation for everything else. We're at the earliest point that we could be in the off season.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree, and that's kind of where I'm at. This is probably about I was just talking with Kip. Yesterday was day 1 of my off season starting, and it's about the weakest I've been as a whole for the most part in a couple years. And still, I had a good season, but we have a lot of work to do, and it's just very obvious going through just some of the basic movement patterns. Me not being able to own a lot of those positions doesn't make much sense to overload that and hurt myself at this point in the off season. It's just not setting myself up for success.
Yeah, exactly. So for those of you that don't know, that was Declan Peterson speaking. He just came back from I think it was a 62-week long summer playing out in the Pecos League in New Mexico. Is that correct?
Yeah, we played about 60 games, and I played for a team called the Santa Fe Fuego. I graduated from Franciscan University in May, and just finished my first pro season. Now I'm back, training with Kip and Bill, and getting strong, moving better, and trying to work on my craft, and then get ready for either winter ball this year or playing next season.
Okay. So between your spring season at college ball and St. Franciscan, right, and the amount of games that you played over the summer, right, you've obviously accumulated a lot of workload, right? You want to speak to that as far as like what you were doing over the course of the season between the spring and the summer to stay healthy?
Yeah, so one of the big things in the spring in particular was I found a really good massage therapist, a manual therapist, that really helped me out. A couple weeks into the season, I had my SI joint pop out of place, and I re-aggravated an old stress fracture that I had. So I met a manual therapist out there that really helped, along with the school's chiropractor. But from there, we really had to work really hard and smart because it was kind of a thing that was always in the back of my head. getting injured, and I missed a full weekend series. But that, and then on top of that, when I went out to Santa Fe, kind of the same deal. Every once in a while, I'll go out to see a manual therapist. But some of the biggest keys I would say was staying healthy, especially when you're playing so many games. Would be sleep, number one. I wish that was something I learned a lot earlier on. When I was in the beginning of high school, I was just joking with Bill earlier about waking up early and grinding and stuff like that. Like, yeah, there's a time to grind, but you can still get a ton of sleep and still get all your work done. And I think it's very important to remember quality over quantity. That was something that took me a long time to learn. So sleep, eating enough, I think that's something in high school that a lot of guys, including myself, just you make excuses. I mean, it just took me a long time to realize that, man, I really am not good with counting calories, and I'm very bad at math, because if you're not putting on weight and you're eating a ton of food, you're obviously not eating enough,
Right.
and you're in a caloric deficit. So it's not rocket science. It's really not that difficult. You just got to build up to it. So eating well, eating enough, sleeping, seeking out manual therapists, physical therapists, chiropractors, people like that will help. And then managing workload between extra amount of swings, extra ground balls, throwing, and then continuing to lift and go hard at lifting in the weight room, but doing it in a smart way. So something that really helped me was still going at a high intensity, but cutting back the volume. Maybe for my main lift, instead of doing 4 or 5 sets and really driving home that adaptation, I'm just stimulating my body and maybe doing 2 or 3 sets. And with a lot of my accessory stuff, kind of the same deal. Instead of doing 3 or 4 sets of different, whether it's core stabilization or upper body pressing or whatever type of lift, instead of that, doing 2 or 3 sets just to maintain and slowly build, but not totally obliterate and totally destroy my central nervous system.
Yeah, and so much of what Declan just talked about there is probably reflective of what a lot of kids went through, playing in the spring and then in the summer. A lot of them probably dealt with some sort of injury issues, maybe less severe than yours, but you think about, like, kids are going through a lot of wear and tear over the course of the season. So now you really have to hone back in on the basics to get your body moving right again first, and then get stronger from there. But some common mistakes that you had kind of touched on right there, just nutrition and weight loss. I would be willing to bet that most high school kids did not put on weight this summer if they played a full baseball schedule, and that's inexcusable for a growing 15 or 16-year-old kid. You should have put on probably 5 pounds of muscle mass this summer, but a lot of kids didn't. So now, in my opinion, a huge mistake a lot of parents and players neglect to make is they think being lean and being sort of thinner is a good look, but it does not function well. So you have to look at the scale. I think every month kids should be at least putting on 1 pound or 2 of good lean mass. That's what you should be looking to try to gain, not trying to maintain or lose weight, especially at this point in the season.
Yeah. So to that point, it's it's funny. One of the most common excuses, if not the most common excuse we hear from guys, is like, I eat constantly all day long, and it's like you'll have them fill out like a 3-day food log, right? And you'll take a look at it with them, and it's like you are not eating nearly as much as you should be, specifically when it comes to protein intake, right? And especially for all these guys that want to come in, they want to get stronger, they want to get bigger and put on a legitimate amount of size over the course of the off season. Where like you said, you could over the course of 5 to 6 months put on anywhere from 25 to 30, even as much as 40 pounds, especially for those guys that are just coming in and starting to train. You have to get your nutrition dialed in to complement that. So I think one of the easiest ways you can start showing them success is just by simply looking at their protein intake and setting 1 gram per pound of goal body weight. So, for most guys that are coming in at, 130, 140 pounds soaking wet, we want to put 30 pounds on you. Say 160 pounds is going to be the goal by the time the spring season starts. Well, your goal should be to take in 160 grams of protein over the course of a day, and you could easily break that down, well, that seems a lot, into 4 or 5 or 6 meals, whatever works best for you, and of course, incorporating snacks in between those meals as well. Right, and then we can talk about obviously adequate protein choices as well, whether you're looking at whole eggs or beef, grass-fed beef, or 97% lean, or 93% lean beef, chicken, fish, of course, protein powder, yogurt, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, things of that nature are always going to be great choices. That's going to help you get those gains right off the bat.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me is I had to realize that I wasn't going to be a guy that digest food very well if I have just 3 ginormous meals a day. I do much better when I have 5 to 6 meals a day. And then I think a good rule of thumb is if you're more towards that route and don't do well, either you don't digest it well or you just fall asleep a lot from eating huge meals, every 2 to 3 hours you should be eating something. Like I still stick by that. And I just eat, little bits throughout the day. Now a little bit is subjective, I guess, for me it's a lot, but your body does get used to it. And I think that's another thing that you need to realize is you're not going to be able to just go out and double your caloric intake out of nowhere and just respond well to it. It's going to be a gradual process where you build up, and eventually you'll get to the point where it'll just be like second nature. Like you don't even have to think twice, and your body will know when it wants to eat and how much it needs to eat.
Yeah, and another good thing that Declan talked about was obliterating yourself in the weight room, and obviously trying to pair that up with fall ball or a baseball schedule. It just doesn't work. Right. Like these kids are already going through enough stress, adding on extra stress by waking up at 6 a.m. and lifting, and then lifting again after school, adding in extra sets, adding in extra exercises at the end. Everybody wants to do those killer core circuits at the end of a training session, and it's just a catastrophe, man. But I think that is something that we've really been working on here so far with our fall teams, is just making sure that we're doing enough to get that adaptation, to groove that movement pattern, no more. The extra stuff is really going to kill you. And I think there's another thing that a big mistake a lot of kids will make is they think if they walk into the gym really groggy, tired, fatigued, they're just going to hop right in, do a half-assed warm-up, and then go and train. And it doesn't work like that, because your training session is not going to be very good, and you're not going to produce those adaptations that we want to see. So
yeah, I just want to touch on that because I'm definitely a proponent of that. I remember my schedule in high school, and I always wondered why I felt like I plateaued around probably my sophomore or junior year of high school. And it's because I was working so hard but not smart. So my normal schedule would be we'd have morning practice at 5 a.m. So I'd wake up around 4, and then I would practice for 2 hours. Then I would, go and shower and then go all throughout school for a couple hours. Then I'd have my strength and conditioning class, lift there. Then I'd get out at 3:30. Eat a little bit, and then I'd go straight to do baseball stuff again, and then I'd lift for a second time, and then I'd get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and then wonder why I wasn't making the progress that I wanted to. I felt like I was doing everything that I could, but it was just there was no purpose to it. I was just overstimulated, and I never rested enough where I could get those adaptations that I was looking for.
Yeah, and this is the conversation that we had with the guys on Monday night before we departed, right? When you come in, it's essential that you are communicating to myself or Bill or Declan or any of the other coaches that you're going to be working with, that what did you do over the course of that day, or what did you do even in the previous 3 days, and then what are you going to do in the upcoming 3 days, right? So if you're getting up at 5:30 in the morning to get in at 6 o'clock workout prior to school, I do commend you for that, as far as you demonstrating that level of commitment and work ethic and discipline. But also, are you in a gym class? Are you in a weight training class in high school, right? And then by the time you come to see us at night, it's well, is this going to be your third workout of the day? Because sometimes the best thing we could do for you at that point is just tell you to go home and make sure you're getting in an ample amount of calories, and ensure that you're getting adequate sleep at night, and then rehydrating for the following day to get back into it in the gym again, right? Or we can bring you into the recovery room, hook you up to the NormaTec, hook you up to the Mark Pro. Any one of our recovery modalities is going to be great for you, but it's when you're driving so much or accumulating so much workload, right, that stress is going to gradually increase over time, right? Fatigue is going to set in, right? Our movement patterns and our force production is going to essentially go out the window, and not only is our health going to start to deteriorate, but our risk for injury is going to increase exponentially as well. So first and foremost, as coaches, our responsibility first and foremost is to keep you as healthy as possible, to ensure that you're staying out on the playing field, and that you're as fresh and prepared as possible to play every weekend, on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, and it's not just us making this stuff up. Like, there's plenty of research out there about fatigue and readiness. And one study I was just reading before this to freshen up on was vertical jump height. They tested vertical jump height right before a lower body training session with athletes, and what they saw was when an athlete was right about their baseline number, performing well in that warm-up jump, they did very well in their training session and they saw good strength gains, whereas the other athletes who maybe performed relatively low compared to their baseline test, so let's say that they could jump 30 inches, but in their base or in their pre-lifting test, they only jumped 26 inches. They had a really poor training session that day and weren't able to get those adaptations in their squat, their deadlift, and things like that. So it really does matter, not necessarily that you have to be able to jump 30 inches before your training session, but you should be able to tap into that right away from the start of your training session, rather than taking 4, 5, 6 extra sets, extra exercises in your workout before you're ready to go.
Yeah, exactly right. We talk about daily readiness and monitoring daily readiness, and there's obviously a lot of great tools and technology out there, like Oura Ring, or for example, I'm wearing a Whoop strap right now, so that gives me pretty good insight as far as like what does my sleep quality look like, my heart rate variability, my overall recovery, and am I in the green zone, the yellow zone, or the red zone, and that just kind of allows me to get a little bit more specific and dialed in on what my training is going to be for that day. But you say, for example, you come in on a sprint day and we take out the speed lasers and we know what your baseline 10-yard dash is, but if you see a significant decrease in your 10-yard dash in the first 1 or 2 100% intensity buildups, then we know that maybe you're in a little bit of a fatigue state and we need to drop down somewhere, whether it be intensity or volume or both, or maybe even completely shift gears and do something along the lines of a movement circuit to enhance recovery and come back stronger the next day. I kind of, anybody else have anything to say about that? I don't want to necessarily shift gears here, but I want to kind of go back to Declan. You just got back home from the Pecos League a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yep.
And you took it easy for the first probably week and a half, and then we got you in with our good friend David Fu. He's our physical therapist that we network with out of Libertyville, right? Because we want to ensure that we're just covering all our bases and checking all our boxes to ensure that we write the most individualized and comprehensive and effective training program for you before we go into the off season. So I was just, I was hoping we can kind of discuss some of the assessments that he took through, or how thorough the assessment was that he had taken you through, and just kind of like what you were able to learn about yourself individually and how your body functions overall, and just kind of how that relates to all these young high school kids that are coming in here starting to work with us, and how important it is that to get an individualized and comprehensive training program based off not only what their goals are, but kind of what their needs are as well to perform at a higher level and stay healthy.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but I would like to think I'm pretty in tune with my body and know more than the average athlete that I'm around for the most part. I'm well studied and I love just constantly learning about my body. But yeah, coming home, I felt pretty good, a little bit beat up, playing so many games between college and my first pro season. But yeah, there was, I had some underlying issues. And I had a hunch of what it might be, but I wasn't 100% sure. So we went to Dr. Fu, David Fu, and he gave me a much better understanding of, a lot of different exercises. He gave me a lot of PRI stuff, and a lot of different ways to think about how to go through some of these limiting factors that I've been having. We found, some stuff to improve the tissue quality in my pec, because that usually gets really tight from throwing every single day. And then I'd had some problems with my front hip flexor and left glute, and that's also the same SI joint that had popped out of place back in the spring. And I figured out that my left adductor was very, very weak and underactive. So a lot of exercises have been programmed towards that. And I was talking about lifting smart in season, and I felt like I found a way to do that kind of on my own. But I'm coming back to you and Bill for help because, even after the first day yesterday, like, it's very obvious I have a lot of like glaring holes and weaknesses like I had no idea that I even had. And I'm very in tune with my body and, always studying and always making sure I understand how I'm feeling and how I'm recovering and whatnot. And, everything I had yesterday was quite incredibly hard and fatiguing, everything. And I had no idea that I had that many holes. So, I think it's really important at a certain point, and I wish I would have done this sooner in my career, is to drop the ego at the door and realize that like you don't know everything, and just because you've been doing bench, squat, clean, and curls doesn't mean that's going to work for your entire career. At a certain point, you're going to hit a plateau. Like for me, that worked, and my strength and conditioning program at high school, it was good up to a certain extent to get me into the realm of lifting more consistently, but I really need guys like Kip and Bill to help me understand better like what is specifically that I need to work on and how to continue to progress rather than plateauing.
Yeah, exactly. So, we got into the weight room, on Monday night, and it was primarily a lower body emphasis, right? And we're having guys do basic patterning drills like a squat with a plate reach, just with a 5-pound plate. Some of them are going to be elevated, right, for particular reasons. So it's like the main goal with that is to set them up for future success, right? Just by teaching them the basic movement patterns. And I'm sure a few guys who've had a little bit of experience in the weight room under the belt, right? Maybe they've been in the weight room for a year or so. Some guys have kind of missed out on their freshman year and they're kind of drawn back a little bit. And I think that's where they're trying to make up for getting in multiple workouts a day, which we know isn't the route to go. But kind of going back to like doing something as simple as a squat with a plate reach with a 5-pound plate. Some guys kind of like roll their eyes in the back of their head and they're kind of like, well, why am I doing this when I've been squatting with a barbell on my back for the last year or 2 years, whatever it may be. And it's like, well, the answer is as simple as this: your squat sucks. Like you have no business putting a barbell on your back, right? And it's like, again, that's one of the things that's frustrating is, a lot of these kids are in a weight training class in high school, or they're working with a football coach or even with their baseball coach, and they're programming nonsense with no rhyme or reason to it, right? It's just kind of like your foo-foo rotator cuff program, or on one extreme, and then the other extreme is just kind of like the, your bench, squat, and deadlift program, or power cleans, right? So where's kind of that middle ground? And that's kind of where we come in, is trying to find that middle ground between creating more of a balanced and comprehensive individualized training program where we're attacking everything from mobility to speed to power development to strength development, but we never want to sacrifice movement competency, right? And if we do that, we know that we're only causing them more potential harm, not only now, but especially in the future. So It's all about setting them up for future success. So we have to teach them how to pattern things appropriately. And then once they've earned the right by demonstrating proper movement competency, we can start to gradually load from there and eventually get into like a goblet squat or a safety bar squat. So
Yeah, and now I think the biggest challenge right now is going to be for guys in two sports this fall. If they're trying to play fall ball and play football, obviously that's going to be a real tough route to get any sort of meaningful training in. So how would you approach somebody who is in that fall sport, soccer, cross country, something like that?
Yeah. So we actually have a couple of guys right now. So we have one kid in particular who's a golfer, one kid in particular who's a football player. We know with the football player, like he has to get his morning workouts in at 6 a.m. before school, and then he has to go outside and he has to practice football for 2 to 2.5 hours, and then he's coming here and he's practicing baseball, right, to ensure that he's prepared for the weekend games. So, what can we do for him? We kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. It's mainly going to be along the lines of recovery, right? He has to get up at 5:30 the following day and get a workout in. So we need to ensure that he's fresh and prepared for that. So the approach is simple. We'll put together some kind of a movement circuit where maybe we're addressing a few things as far as mobility and helping him get into better positions in the weight room, as well as some specific arm care drills that he's not getting in his football workouts as well. And then, right, you always have access to the Normatec and the Mark Pros.
Yeah, and I think on that topic too, just with the guys who are only playing fall ball, you also got to think about their workload as well. If you're a pitcher, how many pitches should you be throwing during the week to prepare you for the weekend and stuff like that? I'm not the best pitching coach out there, so I can't give you an exact number, but I would definitely, highly, highly recommend cutting down excessive throwing volume at this time of year, man. Like right now, we saw all these kids pressing last couple nights, and the one thing that stuck out to me was how much that shoulder, that anterior head of humerus wants to start riding forward. And a lot of these kids' shoulders are not in a good place right now. Adding on extra throwing, like if you can't do a push-up properly, how would you want to add in extra throwing on top of that? That's only going to lead to issues, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I love that you brought that up, because that comes back to the assessment, right? We look at, from a postural standpoint, we'll look at resting shoulder positioning, resting clavicular positioning, how are the shoulder blades resting on the rib cage, right? And then we like to look through various movement patterns as well. Specifically, how are their shoulder blades moving on the rib cage as they reach arms overhead, or right, getting into that overhead position or into a laid back position, right? Via throwing, that's going to tell us a lot about how they function, and right, that shoulder blade functioning will dictate how their shoulder functions, how their elbow functions, how their hand and wrist functions, and ultimately like how effectively they're able to throw a baseball. Last night we were teaching something like, a floor dumbbell press or a floor Swiss bar press, right? Compared to something like a push-up. Well, you look at something like a floor dumbbell or Swiss bar press, right? You're locking your shoulder blades into position. So for somebody that comes in and they kind of present with that military posture where their shoulder blades are stuck together, or kind of like that, or you'll see that downward slope where their shoulder blades are kind of tucked down, or the shoulders are sitting a little bit, or sitting a little bit too low, and they're not able to achieve, full overhead range of motion. Or then, like you had mentioned, you'll see that kind of anterior glide at the shoulder as well, right? And we know that's a mechanism for labral tears, rotator cuff tears, right? So we want to do everything we can to prevent those injuries. So we need to be able to address positioning with them first and foremost, and then we need to teach them what good quality motion is with certain arm care drills, like a back to wall shoulder flexion, like a forearm wall slide, like something like a prone Y hold or a trap raise on the bench, things of that nature. But what this comes down to is like qualification of exercises, right? So if you guys, if you have certain players, right, and we've been able to observe over the last couple of nights, guys that have that anterior tilt or scapular winging or military posture or downwardly rotated position, whatever it may be, they're not going to be qualified for doing something like a bench press, right? And they may not like that initially, but at the same time, there's more important things that we need to address to ensure that they're staying healthy and we're minimizing that injury risk at the shoulder and the elbow, right? Which for a baseball player is your moneymaker.
So just to wrap up today, a few major points that we had. Number one, hydration, sleep, nutrition. Like those have to be locked in. If you're not doing those right now and not creating those good patterns, you're setting yourself up for failure as we start to load more in the weight room and everything like that.
Yeah, that's great for me. As far as wrapping it up from my standpoint, when you guys come in before practice, again, it comes down to communication. We need to know what you did over the course of the day, kind of what the plan is over the course of the week, so we can make the necessary adjustments to ensure we're staying on the right track and keeping you healthy.
Yeah, I would say, just some takeaways, I think about it constantly, especially with my brother now in high school. A couple things I wish I would have slept more, trained, maybe a little bit less, but trained a lot smarter, and would have been an advocate for myself, like Bill touched upon. And especially with Kip and Bill, they're very knowledgeable guys. They're way smarter than you're going to be. They're way smarter than I am. It's why you hire guys like them. So it's just very important to, commit to what they're programming for you and what they're telling you to do, and to trust it. And if you have questions, just don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask at all, because I was, and that's one thing I totally regret.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week with a brand new episode.
Thank you.